Yes, entities exist, and entities are just different forms of consciousness having a vibrational experience that are out of the physical human body. Okay.
Mm.
Entities aren't necessarily a bad thing. Um, the more unintegrated trauma we have. So now what I realize is that most of what I was seeing as entities in my early development, before I had done most of my own healing work, was my own shadow stuff being projected out, coming back to me in a clairvoyant experience. So I have clients all the time. I need an exorcism. I have an entity. And in actuality, it's an unintegrated aspect. It's a fragmented aspect of their own psyche that's
Mm.
manifesting in that.
Welcome to a Broaderlands podcast. The opinions expressed on Broaderlands podcast are those of the guest speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views of the host or Broaderlands podcast. Sarah Grace, thank you for coming on Broaderlands podcast. I really appreciate it.
Hi, Boo Boo. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, and it's an honor and privilege. Maybe you can introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do and your background, since I tend to screw that up.
It's all good. Well, it's been a long and windy road, as it has for most people. I grew up in South Dakota on Standing Rock Indian Reservation in the middle of nowhere, pre-internet. And I just at the age of 7 began seeing, hearing, feeling energies outside of the normal senses. So being a little kid running around, doing my thing, I didn't think too much of it. But unfortunately, in my family, there was a lot of violence, a lot of trauma, and not a lot of open communication. So when I finally said something about seeing spirits and energy, unfortunately, I was shamed and condemned, kind of did the hellfire and brimstone thing. So as a little kid, thinking like, what the heck's wrong with me? That really was a pivotal point for me because that's the moment I started to develop toxic shame, thinking something was really wrong, right? And that played into a lot moving forward. But ultimately, fast forward, I floundered all over, but became a paramedic in California. Started in South Central, which I understand we've got some ties there together. And the energies just started working through me in the 911 calls. So it was not anything I was trying to do. I was still at the time very afraid of it, didn't understand it. But I started being there in such pivotal moments for people and watching kind of the symphony of energy during death or during trauma. And I would see as someone was dying, I could watch the chakras release and the soul exit the crown of the head, and we'd be doing CPR or watch celestial angels come on, scenes of like drive-bys or car accidents or whatever. So I did this for 15 years. Okay. And then I decided to get educated and eventually wrote a couple of books. And now I have a full-time private practice helping people integrate their trauma, addictions, understand their own energetic sensitivities. And it's been quite a journey.
Well, thank you. Wayne Dyer once said, "Love is forgiving, and love is forgiving."
Yeah.
And I hear that in your message because I've listened to you a number of times, and I really appreciate your service work and the power of forgiveness, and that's in your story as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Speaking of that, could you walk us into your upbringing and share about your childhood experiences, if you don't mind?
Absolutely. I think it's really important to share and be open. I don't know very many people at all that have not experienced trauma in some way. And so, if we can lean into how it's affected us and kind of get to the root and integrate any sort of shame or fear around things, then I think we can collectively not only heal ourselves individually, but then collectively really begin to shift, right? And so, I'm very open. The family dynamic that I came from was highly volatile, and my mother had pretty severe mental illness. So on the daily, there was a lot of actual physical violence. So a lot of fist fighting, a lot of being attacked with knives, or I cracked my skull with a hammer and my eyes were burned with nail polish remover.
Mm.
And that was kind of an everyday experience. So my system could never rest. During the nighttime, she would come into my room and smother me with a pillow. And so there was no safety. And when we grow up in extreme chaos or violence, literally fighting for our lives, the amygdala gets stuck on. The nervous system's perpetually jacked, right? And my system was like always amped. So I have spent many, many years uh, learning how to heal myself, which really begins with the nervous system, like starting to learn to calm the nervous system so that you can get through to the stuff that's stuck in the cells from
Mm.
the trauma. But not only was there the physical violence that I was dealing with, there was not a lot of communication, like I said. So nobody's talking. And then the energy happens. And so my every single day experience, even as I sit here now, it's almost like being on acid 24/7, 365. I can see auric field colors, I can see tracers, I can hear things, feel things, know things. I know what's going to happen before it does, which really played out amazingly well on the 911 calls. But uh, but as a little kid who's getting beat up over here and then told she's evil over here for being for being like this, it was a heck of a setup, man, you know?
Mm.
And I got pretty jacked as a result of it. My mom, right when I was about to graduate high school, developed cancer. It was like 6 months diagnoses to death. So it was relatively acute. And in her death, I realized that there was never going to be closure. There was never going to be healing there. There was never going to be like the mother and the mothering that I wanted, and needed as a child. And so that's when I started to just go off the rails. And for me, I had like drinking and started with drugs. And, I was like one of those go big or go home girls. So I'm like Everclear straight, all things white powder. Like I'm smoking 3 packs a day. Like I just went and went, yeah, I just didn't have any sense of safety, support, or self love, you know? And so I wanted to numb it. And amazingly, I found that uppers, stimulants, actually decreased the sensitivities. So decreased the stimulus that I see, which now we know. I mean, look at ADHD meds and stuff like Ritalin stuff, right? Adderall is
Mm.
speed, meth, you know,
Yeah.
and it calms us down. And so I found that, but I wasn't regulated and I was doing it in a self destructive way, in a self punitive way. And ultimately, I overdosed and I had a near death experience. And that was one of my pivot points for the whole thing. Yeah.
Well, can I ask you a quick question about trauma?
Yeah.
Um, you mentioned you don't know anybody that doesn't have trauma. A lot of people, especially I went to the 12-step communities when I after my awakening and I got a little bit of help. But eventually I had to leave because it served its purpose.
Mhm.
And it was no longer useful for me anymore. But it's a great program to get started with. But a lot of people in the 12-step communities that are alcoholics and addicts don't believe they have trauma.
Right.
And, Gabor Mate, Bruce Limp, all those great minds will explain that there's they're linking trauma, with addiction. A lot of great minds today, but the 12-step community doesn't believe they have trauma. A lot of
Mhm.
people. Um, I'll go ahead.
No, what did you have a specific question about that?
So my question is, you said you don't know anybody that hasn't had trauma, and I agree with you. I believe there's no coming out of this experience without some form of trauma. What is trauma to you? How can you best describe trauma?
Man, that's such a good question. So it's going to be different for everybody because everyone has different constructs, right? My understanding of trauma is something usually we feel out of control. Usually we feel violated or victimized in some capacity. And there may be like physical intensity that goes with that. Um, Anything like abrupt can be really jarring, like an abrupt death, or all of a sudden you're in a car accident, or maybe somebody attacks you or even says something mean. So, my understanding is though, there's something that is very abrupt to your system that dysregulates, and like your normal cognitive day to day, you're just like going along, and then all of a sudden it's like, boom, and you don't know what to do with that. And all of a sudden, what happens is it goes into the cells. It
Mm,
goes in that shock that and we a lot of times start creating stories about it like, "Oh, I'm bad. That was mine." Right? "I'm bad. I'm a bad person." And so we start to shove that down into the cells. And then addiction, of course, man, it's like peanut butter and jelly because you're down here feeling icky, and then here comes some substance or some behavior. And let's be real, pretty much everyone's addicted to something, even if it's, you know, technology or work or overachieving, or then, of course, drugs, alcohol, and all the things. And so I look at addiction, and I've been through the rooms and I've done the steps on both sides as well as Al Anon. I got a lot out of both. And like you, it was a good place to start.
mm.
And then I was like, okay, like I don't particularly subscribe to being an addict like forever. I like to like do some things and then heal and move on kind of deal. And so, kind of the same thing that you were saying. But that's my kind of take on trauma. Does that answer you?
Yeah, it does, and I appreciate it. A lot of people don't know in the 12-step community, the co-founders had trauma. I looked into their childhood trauma. Bill Wilson had a lot of childhood trauma, and he suffered from depression throughout his life and died of smoking. Yeah. So thank you. I really appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Um, how did you overcome trauma and in your addiction?
Well, for me, because I'm intense, I had to essentially die and have the near death experience. And after that, I went into a transcended state where I heard a female voice and she was like, "You're not done." And I was like, "Yeah, nah, yeah, I am. I'm good." And she's like, "No, I know it's hard, but if you choose to go back, you're actually going to help a lot of people with this kind of thing." And so I made the conscious choice to come back. Obviously, I'm here. Um, but then I thought that spirit or my guides would, just because I got that message that everything would just be laid out for me in terms of do these things. But that's not how life goes. We have to put in the legwork, right? And so my healing has gone in many, many stages. I initially just kicked all the stuff because I had a lot of things: alcohol, drugs, like the uppers, the accelerants, the amphetamines and things. Those were harder for me to quit, as was smoking. Drinking wasn't that hard. It's not really my thing that much. And I wasn't eating well at all. I was eating a lot of fast food and stuff. So when I was at that stage, I had to just really start to get real about
Mm,
the magnitude of what I'm doing. And then I couldn't do it all at once. So I never went inpatient. I never went into a program or anything. I just like drilled down rock bottom and laid there. And I was like, well, this sucks. I don't want to do this anymore. But I had to step it down. So over the course of a few months, like I kicked out alcohol, increased water, started walking, moving my body a little bit. And then I would tick one thing off at a time. And so the cleaning up my diet was hand in glove with starting to move my body a little bit more. I just didn't feel like eating so crappy. And then kicking the accelerants was a deal. Like I went through some withdrawals from that, but I just did it myself. It was a couple of weeks of just not not a very fun experience, but I was getting to the root of why. Because when you stop doing something that's covering or distracting, then you have to face what's underneath, which is what
mm,
we're usually running away from, right? At the beginning anyway. It's why we do it, is because we don't necessarily want to feel whatever it is. So I started to process through journaling. And that's the very baby basics. And it took me a while to step down off of cigarettes and nicotine entirely. But that was that round. And then fast forward, I started doing a lot of shadow work, trauma integration. I went through a lot of shamanic practices. I've worked with a lot of plant medicines. I've done just a lot of my own integration and trauma recovery work through a lot of different spokes or branches of the spiritual world now.
Well, thank you. I don't know. I brought up the 12-step community, and the co-founder could see. He writes about this. He could see discarnates. Is that the proper wording? He could
Mhm,
see them, and he talks about helping them transition to the other side.
mhm.
He had all kinds of paranormal experiences with that. So,
I didn't know
yeah,
that. That's
yeah,
cool.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's in a book called AA Comes of Age, chapter 16.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. How did you become? You're known as the psychic paramedic. How did you become a paramedic?
My intuition told me to. Essentially, I was after I got myself cleaned up, I moved to different areas of the country and I was running around being crazy young thing in my 20s. And once I moved to California, my intuition just anytime an ambulance would go by, I'd kind of get this like, you should do that. And I was like, no, because I was scared of it. I was thinking like I could kill people. Like, who am I to be able to do that? But what you got to know is there was two things, okay? And if whoever is out here listening and you're thinking about whether it's healing, you're going through your own healing, or you want a better career, you want a better relationship or whatever, but you're like, oh, I'm too old, right? Well, somebody told me because I was in my 20s and I was like, oh, most kids get into EMS when they're like 18, 17. And somebody said to me, well, you're going to turn that age anyway, so you may as well get what you want. Right. So even if you're in a spot in your life and you're thinking, oh, I'll be too old or I'm too old now to do something, like we're going to continue to age. So you may as well go for it. Right. So that was helpful. And the other thing was just like leaning into, I wanted real. I wanted something that felt, because I'd done a lot of modeling. I did a lot of like uh, work and movie stuff, and it was all glamorous and exciting, but I was just like, it's so like superficial, you know? And I'm like, I want real. And there's nothing really more real than the 911 system. So I didn't realize at the time that there would be a million little steps between starting and, becoming a top step paramedic who's running these crazy calls. And that's the other thing. If you're wanting to start something, but you're like scared because you're like, oh, I could never do that, just realize there's always like a learning curve to things. And so I went to the UCLA EMT program over there in Westwood. You know where that is. And then I got sent to South Central, where I started.
Wow, that's awesome. You said you did 911 calls first?
I did 911 calls the whole time, pretty much. Yeah.
Okay. Do you have any experiences you might want to share with us, if you don't mind, that
Mm.
come to mind?
Well, I was the paramedic who I believe it's because I'm wired the way that I'm wired. One, I'm wired to handle intensity and crises because I grew up in that.
Hmm.
Two, I have this spectrum-ish presentation where I can see all of the energy. And so I became the paramedic who was always there for death. Like people loved working with me because they knew that we were going to have a busy shift, you know? And I began to notice. So my biggest takeaway from 15 years of 911. So I started in South Central Los Angeles, then I went to San Jose and did the whole Bay Area, and then I went to Sacramento and did the whole Sacramento area 911. So 15 years plus law enforcement chaplaincy work during COVID. And chaplaincy is where we're hanging out waiting for the coroner with the dead body with the family. It was super intense, but that's a different deal. So, as my biggest takeaway from all of that experience is one, that there's nothing to fear in death. Two, death is as natural as birth. We spend, I mean, there's gazillion dollar industries dedicated to like fear and like bubble wrapping ourselves and like medicating ourselves because people are so scared of death. And it's like, you guys were born to die. This is a finite experience. And so instead of being scared of what's inevitable for all of us at some point and natural, how about we live? Like, how about we live our lives now, right? Because so many people are so terrified of whatever that they never ever live. So that's my number one takeaway as seeing all of that death and carnage. But a couple of cool things I noticed was there's a difference between a medical death, which is like usually expected, cancer, COPD, CHF, like whatever, and traumatic death, gunshot wounds, drive-bys, like, car, all the things. Um, in a medical death, oftentimes the person's just chilling in their bed, and it may be a hospice situation, but there's a whole field of near death experience now. It's kind of cool because it's come out in the last 10-15 years. There's been a ton of studies on near death experience, and this is essentially what I was seeing. So the auric field expands out, and it's almost like you hear the veil thins. It's like, well, what does that mean? So we all have an auric field, right? That is just like our little stuff. This is our energy. This pertains to us. And our consciousness begins to expand out in the final stages of like a long-term disease process. So as the field expands out, the person is able to float above their body. They're able to astral travel. They're able to see loved ones and relatives and pets come into the room. They'll start having communication and talking out loud to them for like weeks before they die, right? They're not crazy. It's just that their consciousness is expanding. And then in the moments of death, the chakras release is really cool to see because it's like so organized. I can't even tell you. And it starts at the root and it looks like ribbons unfurling and it goes up. And the soul usually, not always, but usually exits the crown of the head. And it looks like a little like poof. It just looks like a little streamer of energy that goes out. And so that's kind of the whole medical. It can happen over weeks, it can happen over months, it can happen over a few hours. Trauma is different because the medical, the person's chilling, they have time to kind of understand, like come to acceptance, start talking to their loved ones, start, figuring it out that they're dying. Traumatic death is a different deal. Like you're going to Starbucks, you're late for work, you're pulling out of the drive-through, you're not paying attention, you get T-boned. That's it. I can't tell you how many of those I ran, right? Or you're in some like gang violence or whatever. And the soul is just knocked out of the body. So it's very confusing because one second you're like, you got your latte, and the next you're like, not in your body, and it doesn't make any sense. And so what I would see on those scenes is a person would be standing. So the person's soul would look like the body, except I could see through it. It's translucent. And they were usually really like confused. And then I would come in and they could tell that I could see them and we would start telepathically communicating. This was something that I developed over the span of 15 years, was kind of a protocol like, hey, you were in a car accident, you're dead, we're going to work on your body, I'm going to pull you out of the car, we're going to start CPR, blah, 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 telling him what to do, what we're going to do. But in those experiences, most often, a celestial or like an angelic presence would come onto the scene, especially as they were about to die. And so imagine if there's like whatever carnage in front of us, right? So we have all the stuff and the screaming and the blood and all the things. And all of a sudden, right in the middle of it comes this silent, like presence that just blankets the entire thing in this calm silence and this really gentle white light energy. And then the soul of the person who had just died would start to look at that. And I watched so many times as people would go in and almost like hug or lean into this angelic energy, and then they would disappear. And I would just be left there with their body. So those are my two biggest takeaways, were the difference between the medical death and the traumatic death, and kind of what happens. Either way, you guys, no matter what, it can be an intense experience, but death is like taking off a heavy coat. Like, you're still you. You still have your like understandings of like, oh man, this is what, this is who I am, this is what I like, this was my life, this was my thing. But it's like taking off a heavy coat. And then you go into, like, usually loved ones will come, or if you have religious beliefs, you'll go hang out there for a while, and then go into a life review. And then it's kind of, there's a structure beyond death. And a lot of the traumatic ones, those guys need to almost be in like incubators for a little while, like, just so that they can come to terms with it.
Thank you for sharing that. It's well, I was with my father when he passed away, and this is
Mm-hmm.
before I had my awakening. But my dad, when he passed, he fell off the cliff, and I was with him, and he slipped. But I went and grabbed his body. I ran all the way down to the cliffs where the water is on the rocks. He was compressed, and I grabbed his body, and I'm crying. And I had this. I talked to Nicole Lindy, who's a psychic medium as well, and she described it as a soul blending. I used to always
Mm-hmm.
say I tapped into his consciousness, and
Mm-hmm.
I was out of my body, and I didn't tell my uncle who was with me or anyone else. I came out with all this later when I started a podcast, but
Mm-hmm.
I think I might have shared that in some meetings when I used to share. But yeah, I had an outer body experience where I seen the whole big picture outside of me, and I seen the helicopter, I seen the firemen, the paramedics, and everyone. I seen the whole scene, and then
Mm-hmm.
for a few, I don't know how long it was brief, but I realized that we don't die.
Right.
Yeah, and I had other experiences after that, but yeah, and then a few weeks later, my brother-in-law, a good friend of mine from childhood, we were young, but your story kind of reminds me of his because I used to want to be a fireman growing up. But I was
Mm-hmm.
caught up, a lot of the trauma still held me back. You're not good enough. You're less than. You're not capable. All that good stuff. That voice in the head that's created through the lack of understanding and trauma, and that our brain development. Right, it affects us, and that voice becomes loud. But for me, I never went through with it, and I remember telling him I wanted to be a fireman. And next, he started doing that. He became an EMT, and then one day he got off work late and he's still in his uniform, I believe, as far as I remember. And he just got off, decided to have a beer with his buddy, sitting in, talking to him. And some guys walked by, asked him for cigarettes. And, this is in 2000. And they ended up shooting him in the head. They shot him in the head. And the next day he got his fireman certificate, and he got accepted in Sacramento. That's why another reason why your story reminds me, because he got accepted in Sacramento, but he died. I hear the last words was, I have a daughter, and
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it was a traumatic event, but yeah, I really appreciate it. Thought I'd share that with you because Sacramento, paramedic, and all that other, and you talked about the traumatic experiences with the soul,
Absolutely.
so
It's amazing what humans do to each other. It just
yeah.
doesn't make sense. You know what I'm saying? And stuff like that. It's like, what? Yeah, I'm sorry for that for you.
Thank you. Are you familiar with the ghetto bird? I'm sure you've seen that a lot in Los
What, did they get a
Angeles.
bird like helicopter for?
Yeah, a lot of people don't understand what the ghetto bird is.
That thing used to fly over my house, man. Yeah, I know
Yeah,
that, with that spotlight, just lights up everything like it's middle of the day.
yeah.
Yeah,
So that must have been a big change coming from South Dakota to South Central Los Angeles.
totally. Yeah, you don't really get you don't really get farther, polarity there. But honestly, it was like I took to it like a duck to water. Like, first of all, I personally love diversity, and I love putting myself in an environment where I'm the minority and I get to learn or be around different cultures or different, because I'm like, what is this? I mean, I come from where I come from, but I've always just been like super open. And I always say now, like, I grew up on the res and I worked in the hood. So I love like I love diversity and I love culture. And so it was such like a culture shock to me. And we deployed out of Carson, but we our primary was in Inglewood and then Warren. And then when systems were super busy, we'd have to cover Compton and Watts, and it was always busy. So we were like all over in there. And I remember one of my favorite people that I ever talked to. This wasn't a 911 call. This was just a regular, like we had to transport him to, I think it was dialysis. And we went to the house and it looked like the movie Friday, like it was in Compton, it had the bars and the couch on the porch, and we had to go in to get him to take him to its dialysis is filtering the kidneys. So this guy had been shot multiple times, however many years earlier, and he's sitting in his bed in the back, and now he's quadriplegic. And we have to pick him up and take him on the gurney and get him in the ambulance and take him to his appointment. And so I've got however many minutes in the back of the ambulance with this dude. And here's my little South Dakota brain of like, okay, I'm going to pick this guy's brain because I don't understand gang culture. Like, I want to know because he kind of alluded to the fact that he was among the original, whatever, Bloods or Crips or whatever. And so I don't know. And I was like, well, was it worth it? And he, in that span of however long, half hour together, he was able to break down for me like why, like the block radius and kind of the gang culture, the family, the protection, like how it all forms from a very young age and why they're willing to die for it. Because to me, I was like, you guys are just killing each other. I mean, we were just in the middle of a huge, I forget which gangs it was, but it was just, they were just mowing each other down. So every single day it was 13 to 16-year-old males that we were taking into Martin Luther King Hospital over there. And most of them were dying. So I didn't get it. And I'm like, this is so dumb. Why don't you guys see that you're just killing each other and not doing anything? But this guy was able to kind of break it down for me in a way that made sense to my brain of like, okay, I can actually empathize now.
Mm.
And so I could see, I was like, so you're a paraplegic or quadriplegic, whatever he was, going to dialysis multiple times a week. But now I can understand how you got there and how you could like still feel like it's kind of like an honor in some way. You know what I'm saying? It was a very interesting, one of the coolest conversations I ever had in the ambulance.
That's awesome. Yeah, I posted something a while back, and it was it was about I said we don't join gangs to be bad people. We join gangs because we want to feel loved and a part of, and have camaraderie and be accepted and have family. And got us some negative feedback, but that I can speak to my experience and my friends, a lot of my friends, because yeah, a lot of us feel like we're not lovable. We need something's missing. We don't have family, even though we may have family. Some may not. There's just like we're trying to fill in this void, and I think joining a gang is a way to feel a part of. And unfortunately, there's all kinds of stuff that come with it, but it's coming out of because we're seeking love and acceptance and
Yeah.
wanting to feel
Which can be
part.
said for pretty much all of us, right? Like
Yeah.
wanting to belong, wanting to be part of, like having that sense of validation, like I matter, right?
Mm.
That's such a fundamental aspect of the human condition. And when we are coming from, there's so many like single mother dynamics down there, and there's so many, people like fathers in prison that are there, and then drug culture's there, and then we can expand that out. Like even me on the reservation, I'm kind of left to my own devices. There was not that support, not that like sense of safety, sense of belonging, sense of like strong community. So I totally get what you're saying. Yeah, 100.
Do you believe we can bring in past life trauma?
Oh, for sure. We all
Mm.
have different, my understanding is that we all have kind of templates, and we carry over generational trauma, we carry over ancestral programs and trauma. Some people like you and I, and we're seeing a lot of this now, like we come from a line of like, my line was particularly intense with alcoholism, addiction, mental illness, like violence, all the stuff. And I came here to interrupt, like to interrupt that program, to break those karmic patterns, and to shift, moving forward. So yeah, definitely it's part of the human paradigm, if you will.
Did you get caught in victimhood for a while? Because I always tell people when I walked into the 12-step community searching for seeking help, I didn't my first language wasn't English or Spanish, it was Victimese. And I
Yeah.
blamed my upbringing, my parents, everyone else except really looking at me.
Yeah. Victimese, I'm going to take that.
Yeah, no problem.
Yes. That's everything right there. I was so mad for so long because I had, the deck was stacked against me, from the jump. And I was pissed. And so I blamed everybody and I bypassed, and I would like manipulate, and I would do all of these things and give and justify it.
Mm,
But it wasn't, it's the, I think the violence, whatever, like physical violence to me is like, okay, I survived it, and now I've kind of got that like an intense, but it served a purpose. I was able to go down into those 911 places repeatedly because of that. So I get that. But to me, being wired this way in such an intense, like I'm every little thing my system is picking up on, right? So people's feelings, or just seeing all of their traumas or their addictions, and just this is the same as the color of their shirt they're wearing. And I was like so pissed for so long because I was like, I don't want to be like this. Like, this sucks, man. You know, this sucks. And I see victim mindset and victim culture totally in the rooms, Al Anon as well. I was like, you guys, like, I get it. The steps are great, but come on, like, I'm not here to just wallow, you know? Um, what changed everything for me is I pouted, and I was angry, and I was defiant for so long, and I was self-righteous, and I was doing all the things because I thought I was so justified, which I was in a lot of ways. Like if you look at my history, nobody would have blamed me for like going all the way out on drugs or alcohol. It would have kind of made sense. That's kind of the norm. But instead I chose to go, okay, that sucked. It sucks being like this. It's not a very fun experience when you don't know how to regulate your system, and
mm,
you're picking up on so much because it's like I'm being electrocuted. It's like I got all this stimulus coming in, and it's not a very fun physical way to be, until one day. I think what it is I just got sick. I got sick of my own shit. I got sick of saying the same crap. I got sick of feeling the same way. And I finally said, what are you going to do about it? Like, yes, you're wired like this. Yes, the world is intense to people like you. What are you going to do about it? Like, it is what it is. This is how you are. And like, what are you going to do? And that changed everything, because that was the moment I stopped blaming and stopped doing the like, I'm so sensitive, I can't like function, to which I see a lot of in the spiritual and energetic worlds. And instead, I leaned into it, and I was like, all right, I'm going to learn how to drive this apparatus. Like, I have a particular setup where I can, number one is I can see energy. Number two is I can feel. Number three is I know. Number four is I hear. It's just like, and I needed to figure out how to handle that in my system. So, one, taking responsibility, stop blaming, stop whining. Two, like finding out little things. My nervous system needs, like, I need a lot of water. I need a lot of sleep. I need a lot of grounding. I have to wear earplugs anytime I go out because otherwise I get so overwhelmed. And so I started to figure out all of these steps. And the more I figured out how my system, like what my system needs, the better I felt. The better I felt, the more like it became fun. I was like, oh, look at this. Look at what I, you know, and then I start working with energy and intention, because on 911 calls, I was just like dealing with death and like moving energy of a scene. But now what I'm doing with individuals is it's like going all the way into their system. I can see in their
Mm.
organs, I can see in their cells, I can see in their emotions, I can see their like their whole auric fields, and we can help to clear and integrate and ground and balance. So the more willing I was to be responsible, self-responsible, quit my bit. Can I cuss on here? I should ask.
Sure.
Quit
Why not?
my bitching. Sorry, I'm a paramedic. Take the girl out of the ambulance, but you can't take the ambulance out of the girl.
Yeah. That's
And quit my bitching and just like deal with it, like handle it, you know? And that changed everything. So overall, in today's culture, there is so much gaslighting. There is so much blame. There is so much, you're making me feel this way. You're saying something wrong. You're, as opposed to like
mm,
self-responsibility, right? And so I'm here to represent and embody like the new paradigm of sensitive and the new paradigm of human, which is healthy, happy, and powerful, like super powerful in terms of the holistic spectrum, understanding our self-responsibility in our field and how to regulate our own system. And when we get really regulated in our own system by taking responsibility for it, then we can manifest like incredible things, you know?
yeah, thank you. You posted today something about your favorite spiritual teachers,
Yeah, you
and I thought
saw
it
that.
was pretty cool. Yeah, and I was like, oh, I love all of them. And I have some pretty cool experiences. One day I was praying, right? In step 11, they teach you to pray and meditate. And I was utilizing that prayer because the allergy of the body doesn't seem correct to me with
Right.
science. There's no
Mhm.
such thing as an allergy of the body. But so I started to question stuff, but I wouldn't tell people because they would get upset in the 12 step communities.
Mhm.
But I was praying one day and meditating, and then I asked for guidance. So one day I walk into Barnes and Noble, and this happened to me twice in my life. The first one was with Neil Donald Walsh, Conversations with God. This was early on in my sobriety, and later I get it's almost like I walked into Barnes and Noble and everything got dim except one book,
Oh, cool.
and that book was Joe Dispenza. And
Oh,
Joe
fun.
Dispenza took me down a rabbit hole, and he answers. I started connecting the dots. Bruce Limpton, Gabor Mate, you know, I can go down to Peter Levine, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, it helped me move away from and have the courage to walk away from the 12-step community and say thank you for your help. You served it, your purpose, and it's time to move on to grow, because it was hard for me to say I'm an alcoholic over and over because
Yeah.
that's not who I am. It's
Right.
dangerous, and it's Joe Dispenza will say conscious repeated thoughts become subconscious thinking, and I
Oh,
might
yeah.
be able to take my ass into a relapse by continuing to believe that stuff, those limiting beliefs. And
Mhm.
so I had to walk away from that stuff, but I'm really grateful for the community as well. So yeah,
Nice.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm with you, man. There's a lot of great teachers. I started out, one of my biggest things was having to challenge my own judgment. Um, I was really skeptical because I had been programmed that being sensitive or psychic is bad or evil or whatever. And then the way that I am being a medic,
It's the devil.
we're like super alpha and super like intense. And the spiritual, there's kind of a lot of fluff and a lot of like words that don't really like make a lot of sense to in the day-to-day structure here for me. So I had to get over some of my own judgment and fear. But when I decided to lean into it, I started with basic meditations, guided meditations, visualizations, mantras, and yoga that helps breath the body. So I usually advocate people starting there or starting with Tai Chi or Qigong or something that's movement, so
Mm,
you're getting into your body. And then from there, I went into mediumship many years. I think it was like 5 years of shamanic training and studies. And there's so many great teachers in all of these different sectors. But what I found is in the spiritual world, there's a ton of shadow. Like there's shadow everywhere, right? But like I personally found in the 15 plus years now in the spiritual world that I've been around studying countless teachers that there's more ego in the spiritual world than there is in the fire department. And that
mm,
says something to me because those firefighters like them. So they got parades, they got calendars, they like themselves. And it's like, at least they're honest about it, you know? And the spiritual, it's kind of like sneaky. There's kind of this charismatic, enigmatic, like, follow me, I know the way. And I call bullshit on all that. Because to
Yeah.
me, I'll take little bits from all the different teachers, but I'm going to bring it back to myself and listen to my own guidance. And that's what I advocate for people so much now, is to always, always, always maintain your own personal power, because it can be very intoxicating to have these spiritual experiences. I was in the tantric community for a long time, the kundalini community for a long time, the plant medicine. Those are really big releases, activations, transcendental experiences. And it's very easy to start to like idealize or pedestalize, right? And lose your sense of groundedness and connection to self. And so I always advocate, I'm like, explore away. Like, I personally don't advocate becoming a devotee of any particular. Like, go do your thing, check it out. And then, like you did with 12 step, right? Okay, thanks. That's what I did with the 12 step, especially Al Anon. That was my most recent. And I was like, cool, thanks for that. Got a lot out of it, but I'm not going to subscribe to this forever, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, yeah, taking little bits and always retaining your power.
Yeah, appreciate that. Yogananda came to me, Paramahansa Yogananda, and I didn't know who this character was. He came strong for like my first 5 years of my awakening. But he showed
Nice.
me, even with the help of Eckhart Tolle's work, and Yogananda showed me that they're focusing on my self-realization, and my whole purpose was to show them how to have their own self-realization. And
Hmm.
I'm talking about his movement that has changed ever since he was gone, because now they're focusing the light on Yogananda versus
Hmm.
looking inward and
Yeah.
focusing on their own self-realization. He clearly told me that. It's
That's
crazy.
awesome. That's awesome. And that, I mean, we see that repeatedly through the whole spiritual community now, you know, where these huge movements are disassembling and falling due to ego. And there's a lot of, sexual exploitation and crazy shenanigans happening out there, you know. It's just part of what it is. Always
You
coming
mentioned,
back to self, guys. Always coming back to self.
yeah, you're right. Thank you. You mentioned having a near-death experience. Would you mind touching on that?
Yeah. So my overdose when I was young took me into an expanded consciousness state. And I've had many near death experiences through shamanic studies, plant medicine work, because that's the point of dissolving aspects of the egoic infrastructure. But it wasn't like a physical near death like my earlier one was. But they all went to the same spot, which is essentially kind of a heightened state of consciousness. All it is the little lens that we're looking through here with our little senses. We have the things that make up the earth realm, the ego, which is not a bad thing. It gets such a
Mm.
bad rap in the spiritual community. I'm like, yeah,
Yeah,
but
it
it's
does.
it's, it's part of it. It's part of the point of being here, because we're always unity consciousness experience. We're always having like trillions of different experiences in different dimensions, and there's like so much happening. We come here, to be Boo Boo, to be Sarah for just like the tiniest little bit of time. So having your likes and your dislikes and your beliefs and your opinions is very important. And so we don't need to bash that. And so the ego, the five senses, gravity, not my fave, duality, right? Like contrast, light, dark, masculine, feminine, high, low. It creates the sense of separation here. So everything is playing out perfectly in this human. There's no like, we don't need to overcome darkness. We don't need to like, it's like, no, you guys, this is all, if we understand how this whole gig works, and this is what I got from all my near death experiences and heightened awareness perspectives, is the human dualistic paradigm is playing out perfectly. And there's periods where it's more light and yin. And there's periods like we're in right now, it's more yang and dark, like masculine. And we're just about to go through 2025 to 2035 is the dawning of the age of Aquarius. It makes me want to sing that song.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I won't do that. I cannot. But we're shifting out of the dark linear masculine, greed, control, lust, power. into more of a yin, feminine, holistic, integrated. One
Mm.
is not better than the other. This is just we're all of us humans are just like little microcosmic, we're all having experience. And then there's the macrocosmic, which is the bigger collective experience. And this has been going on for millions and millions of years. And so relax. Like there's so many people get so tight, like wound up in the spiritual world. Like, am I on path? Am I doing what I'm meant to be doing? I'm like, just live your life and you're doing it. But we want to have that importance and we want to have that. And it's like, I get it. I
Mm.
totally get it. And it goes back to wanting to belong. It's that fundamental aspect, right? Does it manifest in gangs? Does it manifest in like spiritual identities? Does it manifest in
Mm.
overachieving and needing to acquire and consume continuously? There's a lot of ways that it comes out, but it all stems from the same root, right?
Yeah.
And so in those heightened experiences, all it is a remembering.
Mm.
You just go home, but what is home? It's a remembering. It's just taking off like the goggles and being like, all right, there's that heavy coat that's off. And it's just like, ah, that feels good, right? But then we come back down here and we have our little experience remembering. Because that was the thing when I was doing all these medicine experiences and all these like transcendental, and I would be in this bliss consciousness for like 7 to 10 days, is usually how long it hangs before we drop back into bills and laundry and, dog poop on the carpet and like whiny ass kids and all the stuff. And then we get all like, we lose that euphoric. And then we're like, oh, I'm not spiritual enough because I'm not. And it's like, no, no, no. I did that for so long. I was thinking I wasn't doing it. I wasn't being spiritual right? And then I realized after doing that so many times, I was like, no, this is how it is. This is the design of it. So embrace the dog poop on the carpet and the bills and the stuff as much as you embrace these transcendental experiences. And when you hold that, then you remember, and then it's like, woo, then we can play because then we're in non-dual.
So you're
Yeah.
saying it's not about farting hearts and riding unicorns all the time?
No,
I'm just playing.
it makes me crazy. It's been so fun because I've never really felt that I belonged on this planet anyway. But in all of the different genres that I've gone through in my life, I think EMS and first responders, that's kind of where I fit in the most. I didn't fit in entirely because I was still weird that I saw dead people, but like being around these like super alpha SWAT dudes and medic and everything's just so intense and the crass sense of humor and all that kind of stuff, like it all serves a purpose, right? Like I just felt like I belonged and I could be myself. And then my intuition's like, okay, now you need to go be an energy healer. And I'm like, I'm sorry, what? I'm sorry, come again, my good ear? Like, what are you talking about? Energy healing. I'm good at death and trauma. And my guides were like, yeah, you are, but you got to go over here because you're going to be able to help way more people. Like, you got to take all of what you did here and you're going to build on it. Now you're really going to help way more people. I was just so resistant because it's like there's this stereotype of what spiritual is. And it's like, you can never be, it's all positive and you're wearing flowy clothes and you don't have an ego, and I'm just like, what is that? Like, it's not even real, it's a setup. So I'm like a bull in the china shop in the spiritual community, which is probably why, because I'm doing so well, because I think a lot of people are ready for just real talk, like wanting authenticity instead of this conceptualized ideal. Does that make sense?
Makes a lot of sense. Thank you. Yeah, a lot of times, even in A Course in Miracles, the ego's like a bad thing. It's
Yeah.
really
I don't
bad. And
I don't get
oh,
down with that. I mean, of course, there's things like sociopaths and narcissists, but even those guys serve purposes. You know what I'm saying?
mm.
Like everything plays out, and you can learn really powerful lessons as a result of being around those types of things. So
You always say the ego's not your amigo when you're unconscious of it. But once
yeah,
you become aware of the ego, okay, because I need the ego. If I'm going to fall off a cliff, my ego's going to tell me, hey, you're going to fall. You know, be careful. Or, if I need to talk to you and call, hey, Sarah, you're going to turn around. That's the ego, right?
yeah,
It's not a bad thing. I'm just trying to
not at all.
communicate with you.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Earth School. You heard about Earth School. How would you describe that?
Earth school in the sense of like this life is we're here to learn lessons, that kind of
Yeah.
gig.
Yeah.
I I think that that's yes, to a degree.
Mm,
And ultimately we're having experience. That's what we're doing. Whether or not we learn, that is going to be different for every individual, and not all of us are up to the same thing. And so it's not like a we came here for this. Again, that's kind of the McDonald's spirituality that Western spirituality has become, where it's very uniform, right? And it's, yeah, it's just kind of a little fluffy. So my understanding is that we're incarnated for a tiny period of time in the total, like the tapestry of what is. Say we got 100 years, which is a long span. Okay, so say we're functional for 80 of that. We're going through and we're having our experiences, and we may or may not learn, right? I know a lot of addicts that never learn it.
mhm.
Most of them don't, right? What is it, a 10% success rate, right?
Even
And
less than that. That's being generous. Yeah.
yeah. And so are they bad because they didn't? No. It just is, right? And then we look at the counter, the parallel, like there's an entire spectrum playing out of different types of behaviors. And
Mm,
it's all like consciousness experiencing itself in various lenses. So we as humans dictate what's right, what's wrong, whatever. And so Earth School, yes, because we are going through things and we can learn and we can integrate that to kind of direct the future, which is it's not even future lives or past lives. That's the other misconception. It's all happening right now, which doesn't
mm.
make sense unless you've had those transcendental experiences and you're like, oh, right, I see, I get it. Um, but yeah, it's this incredible matrix, but
Wow.
not I think personally that the spiritual community kind of like likes to water stuff down and make it, yeah,
Mm.
like McDonald's, really, unfortunately.
Yeah, appreciate that. You mentioned these angelic beings coming to the soul and guiding them to the I don't know what you want to call it, a different realm, afterlife, or whatever they got to go home. Um, but they're personalized to each individual. Why do you think that is? Because you hear that in people with near death experiences as well. Like for some people, Jesus will show up; others, their parents or their pet, or Krishna in the East. But why is it personalized? Do you believe?
I think it's usually around belief structure. So a lot of people who are Christian will see, Mother Mary, Jesus, and like you said, different archetypes for different belief structures. Celestials, it's just a frequency. And so angelic realm, it's just like this really high pitched, gentle. It's so yummy. It's like one of the yummiest vibrations because it's just this really gentle, high pitched love. And so it can come and it'll look like an angel. So does it like that may look differently to different people. I don't really see them with wings, how it's typically depicted. It's usually just a light body, right? And it's just this energy of this celestial. But typically what we see as we're dying, or even in near death or like crazy trauma experiences, that's usually around our own belief structure stuff and family stuff.
Mm, thank you. Thank you for that. You talked about, I heard you talk about these entities following you home.
Mhm.
Ha-
A lot of entities, yes, entities exist, and entities are just different forms of consciousness having a vibrational experience that are out of the physical human body. Okay.
Mm,
Entities aren't necessarily a bad thing. Um, the more unintegrated trauma we have. So now what I realize is that most of what I was seeing as entities in my early development, before I had done most of my own healing work, was my own shadow stuff being projected out, coming back to me in a clairvoyant experience. So I have clients all the time. I need an exorcism. I have an entity. And in actuality, it's an unintegrated aspect. It's a fragmented aspect of their own psyche that's
mm,
manifesting in that. That said, just like angels are kind of a certain pitch, this vibration, there's certain pitches and vibrations that come along with heroin, alcohol, meth, fentanyl. Those guys got, it's like you know what gasoline on an oil or on a puddle looks like? It's got that
Mm,
sheen.
yeah.
That's if you add that and make it kind of oily, that's what the energies look like in the fields of the people that are using that. So there's this consciousness. Could you say this is an entity? Yeah, it's got a consciousness that's entering your field because you're putting a substance into your system, right? And but everything ultimately is there, and we can learn from it. We can navigate, we can integrate, we can make different choices. There's a lot of ways to deal with different energies. There's nothing to fear, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, thank you. I come to realize that death is an illusion created by the mind. Who we really are doesn't die.
Right.
Um, how does it look like going into a market with you?
Oh.
How do you do that? I mean,
Oh, well, I gotta have earplugs now. Fluorescent lights actually hurt. They kind of feels like they burn, and I can feel and hear different conversations from all around. So restaurants are hard. Costco, dude, it's like so not my favorite. But I gotta fit in and work in this life. So earplugs are big. I know what to do now in terms of taking care of my own field. If you're really sensitive, whoever's watching this, and you always take everybody's stuff on, it comes through the front body of the chakra systems. So don't ever stand front body to front body. Always angle yourself slightly, especially somebody who's mad or if somebody's on a substance. Do not stand front to front because all their stuff will go into you. But if you angle, it'll go around you. And if somebody's really intense, I'll just cover my hands on my solar plexus or my heart, my solar plexus, and it acts as a physical deflector. So that those are ways that I can kind of like Aikido. It's like I'm doing energy ninja stuff all the time now,
yeah, thank you. I got one more last question. What kind of advice would you give somebody that's still in the closet with these abilities,
it's
that's
our
afraid of being judged?
It's our time. That's such a great question. It is our time. It is our time. You are like this for a reason. You are not weird. There is nothing wrong with you. You are actually a badass. And now my what I'm doing now is I've just founded Empath X. So Empath X is the new paradigm of human, and it's a real life school for the gifted. So
Hmm.
I'm going to be building that as we move forward to teach people like super practical. It's got to make sense. We got to be able to like land it. Okay. Like, how do you go grocery shopping? What do you do if you see dead people or hear things or feel things or know things or float out of your body? Like, what do you do with that? And then how do you apply it? Like, okay, great. You see stuff or you feel stuff. Like, we got to regulate the nervous system, the endocrine system. And then how do you want to use it in this life? Because we can take these things and we can help. We can help people. We can help the planet. You can help animals, like whatever it is. So I get it. I spent 25 years in the closet. I understand it's not a fun place to be. But as you come to your self acceptance, you're going to feel so much better. And then you find community. Like I've got the Grace Place, it's a bunch of us sensitives from all over the world. People can
Hmm.
come check it out. And like you find community and it makes sense. And then you can use it in a way that feels good. And then it's like breathing. Yes, it's so good. It's our time. It's our time.
That's awesome. Are you friends with Karen Anderson?
No.
She was a psychic sheriff, and she used her abilities to catch people or solve crimes or catch the suspect
I need to
through
talk to her.
through speaking with animals. Yeah, I'll connect you later.
I
I'll
would
give you
love that.
her info.
Be super cool. One other thing that we're doing is my journey into grace, Tales of a Psychic Paramedic, my first book. It's in contract to become a scripted television series.
I was
So
That's awesome. I was thinking that to this morning. I was like, they got to have like a some kind of show with your experiences, kind of like a Chicago Fire.
yeah,
You know,
that's it's going to be like
ver-
Grey's Anatomy, except first responders and paranormal.
You know what's funny is one time I tried to contact Michael Landon's wife
Oh yeah.
because I wanted to ask her if we can redo uh, Highway to Heaven. I want to play the part.
Oh,
No, and I really meant that. Like I would love to do that because I feel like it can help.
oh
It would
yeah. I remember that
be very
show.
helpful. Yeah.
Well, fortunately, like the collective is opening more to this. And I still feel like I'm here to bridge the mainstream with the energetic and holistic worlds in ways that make sense. So
Mm.
being a paramedic, like there's people like trust that, because you gotta like so being able to communicate in a way, I don't talk in foo-foo language. We can make stuff make sense and we can like land it so that you can actually feel good, so that you can actually thrive, so that you actually understand how to navigate this. So I'm a living example of what's possible. I came again, uh, raised in on the res and worked in the hood, and I had the entire deck stacked against me. I self-published a book, and it's just
So
gone into all of this because it's time. So if you lean into your own gifts and sensitivities, it's the universe is naturally going to open up and put people in your sphere and in your world to help you. It's about you like becoming the whole aspect of who you truly are. That's what this is about. So let's go. I'm down.
thank you.
Yeah.
Um, thank you for coming on. You have any last words or?
I'm great. You guys can find me at sarahkgrace.com, SARAH, and then K Grace, GRACE.com. I do one-on-one sessions and I've got the Grace Place and, all the books and meditations and all the things. So reach out if you need help.
You also have an awesome YouTube channel, right?
Yeah, thank you. I've
Yeah.
got the YouTube channel, Sarah K Grace Life. I think there was Sarah K Grace. I'm not sure which one that is. But yeah, watch because we're just now starting to shift into the empath X. And I feel like the empath X is going to just be like, yeah, huge. I'm excited.
Yeah. Well, thank you for coming on. I'm going to end it with the Bhagavad Gita quote, chapter 2. And it says, the self cannot be pierced by weapons or burned by fire. Water cannot wet it, nor can it wind dry it. The self cannot be pierced or burned, made wet or dry. It is everlasting, infinite, standing in the motionless foundations of eternity. The self is unmanifested beyond all thought, beyond all change. Knowing this, you should not grieve. And I think if I was to anyone I've ever talked to, I think you're the one that would probably understand this the best. Like grieving's beautiful because it's showing that I love, showing that I care and I have connection. But and there's a deeper part knowing that we don't die,
Yeah,
and and I think you understand that very well. So thank you for coming on.
100%. Thank you so much for having me. Let's keep in touch.
Sounds good. Thank you.
All right.
Just know we out here. Know we out here working in a major way. Had to speak on it just to make a play. Any given subject, know we make a way. Time to level up on a day-to-day. Know we out here working for the greater good. Expand your mind, broaden your lens the way you should. From the stars to the galaxy to speak on spirituality. Higher understanding for the neighborhood.